Dr. Bob Deutsch, who's a cognitive anthropologist, is the founder of Brain Cells. He's worked in Pennsylvania Avenue, Madison Avenue, and in the primeval forests. And to him, they're all the same. The behavior that he sees in all of those places is exactly the same. And I think that's really interesting. The one thing that I admire about him is he knows nothing about consumers. And on a daily basis, he tries to keep it that way. He lives in Florence, but he will jump on a plane anytime because he really has a passion for what he does. And he's here today, and I want to give him a warm round of applause, and he's going to take us through his thinking. Thank you very much.
Wow, I can't even see you, the light is so bright. Thank you for the welcome. I think I just get straight into this because I know the beach beckons and it's just a few meters away. If we know anything, if we've discovered anything new over the last 10 or 12 years about the relationship between language, behavior, cognition, neurobiology, we know a lot of interesting mechanisms now, and we know a few overarching things. And I'd like to start by talking about one overarching thing, which is the idea that we now know something about how and why words count so much. Words count. They're not just fleeting. So I'd like to take as my task today something about words. It's a simply stated task and a big job. And even if I'm not up to it, I want to attempt it. And that is, I'd like to move the industry's lexicon by one word. I'd like to remove the word consumer Thank you. It's been lovely being before you today. And replace it with people. Those two things are quite different. And today I'd like to talk about the differences and how those differences might be reflected in thinking about things like how to talk to people, how to understand people, not explain them, but understand them, and what all this means for things like branding from the point of view of people, not consumers, and what this, how this might relate to inspiration. And what I'll show you formally, not metaphorically, is when you consider branding and what that entails from the point of view of people, it's identical, absolutely identical with inspiration. So I'm not talking, of course, about just giving lip service to a word change. That's easy, and we're all very good at that, sorry to say. I'm talking about keeping this notion of people sacred and knowing what it means and living accordingly. My subheadline, I think, is if you do that, more often than not, you could have more fun than frolicking on the beach. At least that's my experience. First of all, people are so damn interesting. I mean, if we see them and appreciate them from the point of view of, John Updike has a beautiful expression, the gallant, battered ongoingness of life. And we're all engaged in that. We're all in the middle of that. You and me included. You know? And what that means to me is just recognition of the fact that life is a divine comedy. Life is a paradox. Life is a mystery. We're all living this amazing experience of, and in it we're courageous, we're scaredy cats, we're fragile, we're enduring, we're smart, we're hesitant, we're capable of great humor, and we're stupid sometimes. And that's the beauty of being human. And why I'm saying it that way is the idea of consumers and the methods that that word implies is too small of a box. It's too small of a unit of analysis, if I could say it in a scientific way, to do what we need to do and do what we can do and do what we want to do to have fun. So I'd like to talk about people. You know, Anne Hand said yesterday something that reverberated in me, which is she was talking about an interaction over a task that she had with Alistair, and she said, "We had the time of our lives." Remember that? You could have the time of your lives mostly every day if you get into the guts of people. You know, and even as I once heard this, I heard this as a young boy, and it stuck with me. William F. Buckley Jr. He said, 99 out of 100 people are amazingly interesting, and the one who isn't is interesting because of that. And that's true. And sometimes you find that one person, and you show them to respect, to try to understand how they accomplished being not interesting. So to just appreciate and value, and then that allows you to discover that texture. I like to call it the texture of human life. You know, life doesn't admit a straight line. And a lot of our methods assume a straight line, assume a linear, rational, logical cover story, I call it. That's not the reality of people. So, people, not consumers. And I've been at this now for about 15 years, being what I call a cognitive anthropologist, better, AKA a pain in the ass, which clients now seem to like, thank God. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be asked to speak here, because after those 15 years, I'd like to say something about what I think is important for what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And I'd like to do it in a way that follows the form of people. I don't want to do it as a spectacle. Okay? That's a conscious choice on my part. I have to live with that. I have no music. I'm not showing any reels. I just want to talk to you about people. And maybe forewarned, Alistair will not yank me off the stage and you will withhold your tomatoes. So, people, not consumers. I should say, other than trying to be true to people, that there's a very practical reason to focus on people, not consumers. And it's becoming more self-evident day to day. And that is, that's what clients want. You know, 90% of my practice is clients calling and saying, Dr. Bob, tell me something no one else has told me about such and such. Give me deep insights into this group of people, because I've done 5 weeks of work or 5 days of work, or in many cases 5 years of work. And I now realize that what I have is what everyone knows before we started. A bunch of stereotypes, a bunch of cliches that are not false, but they really carry little or no information that allows you to differentiate and distinguish yourself. So clients want what they call, at least to me, deep insight. It's not deep insight, it's just what are people like, not consumers. The other practical reason, which in my experience happens more often than not, that could mean just 51% of the time, it doesn't happen all the time, at least to me, is that kind of work bubbles up, doesn't fizzle out. I've never in 15 years been hired by the CEO of a company. But it's not rare that once I do the work, the people that hired me and I'm working for directly, like senior VP for marketing or global brand manager or something, they say, "Oh, Bob, you got to come in today because the CEO wants to speak to you." Because they hear about that stuff. And more often than not, what they want to hear is not so much your story about what you're doing, because they've already heard that from their people. They want to hear, how did you do that? Because maybe we should be doing that so we don't have to hire you. And that's fine, because they don't do it anyway, the way you think it should be done, and they want you anyway. And they want you. And if I should say, I'm saying this somewhat to the young people out there, but also in 15 years, I've met some extraordinary planners. I've learned a lot from many of them. And, I'm often asked by journalists, why someone of your experience and background is doing this. And I always say to them, I said, okay, you get any topic that you want to pick. You get 5 people to address that topic who you want to pick. I'll pick 5 planners, and let's have a debate on any topic of your choice, not necessarily related to advertising. We'll win. I totally believe that's true. And I thank you for all of you who I've worked with and who have taught me much. You don't have to be an anthropologist by degree. In fact, sometimes that gets in the way, sometimes not. You don't have to be uncomfortable and live in the Amazon jungle and have every dermatological disease known to mankind, like I did, to be an anthropologist. Just have to be open to the experience of people, and that means open to your own experience of you as people. You're people too. So, consumers, not people. Psychographics, demographics, attitude and usage studies. If you will, from my point of view, I don't understand them. Attitudes are a fiction of American psychologists who study freshman college students. Attitudes assume a fixed relationship between role and assessment of situation that people don't do. Usage frequencies don't matter in terms of understanding people. A person could use something once and it could reorganize their whole experience of life. So I think what I would suggest in its place is what I would call emotion and belief studies, as opposed to attitude and usage studies. And I will talk about what that means. So how do we do this? I've been trying to think of a little acronym that uses the 4 A's. A, and I couldn't do it. I came up with stupid words. So you'll forgive me 4 A's, and I came up with 3 P's instead. Again, simple to say, maybe somewhat hard to do. Go personal, go particular, and go primal. So let's take that one at a time. And to go personal, let me talk personally a second. If you're not authentically, intrinsically, instinctually, sincerely, inherently, and all the other lees, into what I call being on a search narrative in terms of finding out about life, finding out about people, which is just another way of saying finding out about life, and also finding out about life and people as a way of finding out about yourself, then I don't see how you could be a great planner. That's just my editorial comment. But if you're on that search narrative, if what you're doing is not just taking on a set of disembodied procedures that are handed down to you by client, by agency, by whatever, but something that's in you. If you're living, I could say it this way, if you're living, by being a planner, if you're living that burning point of what you do is who you are, then there is no better job in the world, my experience, than being a planner or being a consultant with planners. I consider myself, as one of you, a planner. I just don't work for one agency. There's no better job. You're into the guts of what it means to be human. There's nothing better. There's nothing more enlivening. And again, just to be repetitive, I've had that experience of, it was the time of our lives that Anne mentioned yesterday. And I'm sure a lot of you have had it. And when you stick with people, not consumers, it's there for the taking. I should say one other thing, again, practically speaking. As my fiancée says to me, because she's met some clients that have been taking me out to dinner and I've asked her to come, she says, Bob, you say some of the stupidest things, but people believe you. because they're from your own authenticity. They're from your own experience of life. You're not just, you read this stuff in a book and you're putting it out. It's you. And you're so involved in it, and you believe in it so much, and you care about it so much, people are swept up into that, and it's contagious. So sometimes you could even be a little wrong, and people will go with it. And I should say, don't be afraid of being wrong. I call my little operation brain cells with an S, to be cute. I was really thinking about calling it Failure Incorporated. Because that's also being human. You have to risk. You have to tolerate not knowing for a moment. And that's being human, and that's relating to yourself as people, too. So that's fine. I'm asked by clients all the time questions I don't know the answer to. And I say, I don't know. But I will know if you allow me to talk and listen and observe people. But I don't know from the outset. You know, I'm not a guru. I think planners shouldn't be gurus. They should be armed with an orientation and a passion and some structures to view the world with, and then go out and meet up with that world in the context of your client, the category, the product, but meet up with people. So go personal is a simple way to say it. I could say it in whatever it was, 3 minutes, but it's for you to talk about it with yourself. Next is go particular. Particular. I relate to planners as artists. Literally. I'm not saying that to be flamboyant and complimentary to you. Literally. Your job when you do it right is you find the particular, how the personal is expressed, and in that expression, one way to say what a planner does to me is you find how that personal expression is a parable for everyone. I think that's part of your job. You have to find that, what I'm calling the unexpected particular, not what everyone knows. You know, how do people with their own stuff going on, interesting stuff, because it's not logical, it's not linear, it's not rational, it's not irrational. It's what I call illogical. E standing for emotion. It's emotionally logical, which is very different from logical. But there is a reasoning to emotion. Okay, people are afraid of emotion. A lot of people are afraid of emotion in business because, oh, it's too chaotic. No such thing. There is a reasoning to emotion. And if human beings are anything, they're patterned. If we weren't patterned, we couldn't be doing anything. Zero. We couldn't be talking to each other. We couldn't be understanding each other. We couldn't even exist as a species if we didn't have patterns. So be particular, and in that way be an artist. Part of being an artist and finding the particular is what I like to call discovering the secret story. You know, we all have cover stories that we create for ourselves and that others put on us, too. You know, the cover story is the simple story about viewing people as consumers. You know, everything is linear, everything is logical, everything is under control, and if it's not under control, we have the plan to have it under control soon. And it's all covered. I don't think so. Okay, so you have to speak to people to try to uncover that real story of that zigzag, of that life is not a straight line. And I might say that in doing that, it takes a little time, sometimes. And part of our job, I think, is to have the courage, if I could say it that way, to endure the wait, to hear the real story. Have the courage to wait. It doesn't take that long, and it's hardly ever that you don't find it. Because people, without remedy, if you allow them, will reveal that to you. But you have to speak to them and relate to them in certain ways, not ask self-limiting questions. So, the courage to endure the wait. You know, someone once asked, I had the great privilege of spending 7 months in Gombe with chimpanzees. that taught me an amazing amount about humans. Didn't teach me much about chimps, but it taught me a lot about humans. But someone asked me after I came out of that experience, why did chimpanzees create tools and no other primate, non-human primate, has? And, you know, I'm not the world's expert on chimpanzees, but I said it from my own experience, answered from my own experience, which was chimpanzees are creative. Why? Because they have the time. Literally. Literally. All other primates are living in this frenetic world of threat, like baboons, you know. They're constantly looking around because every approach is a potential threat. So they have no time to just wait and ponder and reflect and do whatever is going on in their heads. Chimpanzees have a social structure such that they could sit on the ground and play with a stick until by trial and error they start picking up termites and go, "Oh, that's a creative idea." Okay? They have the time. Take the time. Time is a big issue. There's, again, a lot of my experience with you and planning and me as planner is, you know everything I'm saying. I'm not saying anything new to most of you. But we come under the pressures. One of the pressures is time. You know, I understand the difference and all that implies between relating to consumers and relating to people and the differences therein. But, I have to do this by tomorrow. So I have to go back to relating to them as consumers. In my experience, be it small, one person, 15 years, is I never met a time pressure imposed by an agency or client on me that was not totally arbitrary. And when you ask them why, you know, I have to do this by tomorrow. Why is that? They have no good goddamn answer. And oftentimes if they stick to their guns, it's my experience again, that 6 months, 1 year later, they come back to you and say, well, remember what we didn't have time to do then? We want you to do it now. So, again, that brings up a good point. Let me say something a second. You have to pick and choose when to fight the battles, right? You can't fight battles all the time, then you're just an idiot. And immature and naive. And not strategic. But if you're going to be authentic, if you're going to be true to yourself, and you have a self that you're conscious of as an idea, then there are battles to fight. Okay? And never assuming you're going to win all of them. You don't, at least in my experience. But it's good, it feels good. Not only in the name of yourself and having fun and doing the good thing, but to do good for your client. It's good to fight the battles sometimes. The ones you choose to fight because you know they're important. You know? And boy, people orient to that. You're in a meeting and blah, 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 and then you say, no. That's not right. That's bullshit. That's blah, blah, blah. And then try to back it up with some explanation. It's not just my opinion. You know, I don't care. I don't even care about my opinion. But if I have some backup for my position, and I think the battle is worth fighting, I'm going into the fray. And as I'm saying, as my experience is, over the years, over the 15 years, more and more, and almost full-blown now, Clients appreciate that. You know? If you want to become a strategic partner and not just a supplier of advertisements, do that. That's my experience. So, particular. The other thing is there's a vicious, beautiful circle, you know? And that is, the more you relate to people in an authentic way, the more you have access to yourself as people, the more you learn, the more you want to learn. It's an addiction. It's literally just sweeps you away in it. So the more you do it, the more you're better at it, and the more you love doing it. And then you're into this thing where a lot of things are, I've had the time of my life. And this third P, after go personal, go particular, is go primal. The irony is, I think, perhaps it's not the only way, but one way to be compelling and be contemporarily compelling is to go primal. To find what's ageless and unchanging and, in a sense, in everyone's bones. And again, make that a parable for everyone. So go primal. Finding that underlying commonality. Finding that particular, that's personally expressed, but you hear reflections and echoes of it in all the narratives you hear, and you make that into a parable for everyone. You know, finding what's in all minds. And there is a lot of stuff in all minds. Again, patterns across people. And I love this quote from Picasso, because it's absolutely true. You know, if you're looking for the universal, you don't have to travel around the world. You know, look in your kitchen. If you know how to observe, if you know how to listen, if you're open to the experience of people, the universal, as one occurrence, is in your kitchen. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about primal under the whole perspective of anthropology. Anthropology entails a couple of things. I call what I do primalysis. Again, just to make a trademarkable word. But what it means is, I think, important. It means you must, because that's the only thing you can do. That's what's within you. Focus on recovering the authentic experience of people. Don't do anything that perverts that authenticity. Don't do anything that domesticates that authenticity, that corrals it into being something it's not. Because you have to understand that to help your clients. Right? Client stuff has to fit into people's lives. People's lives don't have to fit into your client's stuff. Of course, that's a truism. But a lot of our methods don't imply that. Go deeper than top of mind. Top of mind can be also important, but you want to give people time to go beyond that and see how the top of mind relates to the deeper structure, so to speak, of the narrative that you hear from people. And the other thing relates to ethnography. Everyone does ethnography now. Okay? Some of it, in my estimation, is just fantastic. It's just amazing. And some of it is a bunch of, I don't know what it is. You know, sometimes people go out to someone's home, look in their cupboards, come back, write a little report or make a briefing and think that's ethnography. That's not ethnography. Ethnography entails that you know how to observe and you know how to organize what you observe into what I like to call the structures that people live in. People live in experiential structures, like architectures, like their houses. That's the way they experience it. So let me talk about some structures. The biggest one is what I call the self-story. Everyone has a self-story. A story about three things. Who I am, and I might say this is not idealistic stuff. The self-story is not, I want to be like Mike, okay? It's quite intimate, it's quite potent, it's quite real, and it's quite multifaceted. It has a lot of love and hate in it. It has a lot of attachment and loss in it. But it's real. So it's part of the story everyone has about themselves, the I story. Then they have a story about others. You know, it's the amalgam of how they conceive of other people. Sometimes the story can be very short. I did some interesting work for Douglas Atkin on cults. One of the groups I spoke to was Hell's Angels. Okay? They're tremendously interesting people. And they have a story that others thwart them. That's their story about others. The world and others thwart me. Okay, that could be a story. In fact, that's why Harley-Davidson is such an interesting thing and such, from my point of view, an amazing brand in the way I want to talk about brand, which I'll explain in a minute, because it stands for all brands in the sense of the mechanism of branding, which is that which is a brand to me, meaning that which I am instinctively emotionally attached to, without any further explanation of attributes, is something that helps me become more of myself. And a Harley-Davidson to a Hell's Angel does that. Okay, so people have a story about who they are, what others are like, how the world works, in other words, causality. This happened and that led to this. Again, this is not rational, logical stuff. It's E-logic, emotionally based logic. And they take that story about me, others, and the world, and they say, how could I maximize self given that? Okay, and that's what I'm calling self-story. I'm here to suggest to you that's the most profound structure people live in. And once you know something about that, a lot is possible. First of all, they perceive everything else in the context of that. The image they have of that, or you, or it, is reflexively part of the self-story. So that's a big structure people live in. Another structure that I think we don't give enough attention to is time, subjective time. If I listen to people talk, one of the things I always hear is how they're trying to segment time. You know, this was then and this is now. How they make brackets between things. And in those brackets are places where change happens. So you have to listen for this subtext of time. And even in the sense of, one of the things to me that was interesting about the great presentation yesterday about cranium was the top of the treasure chest. The timing of it had to be made exactly right. See, that to me is an issue of human subjective time and rhythmicity, which is critically important. Rhythm, ritual, rhythm in a sense is ritual. It's a structure people live in. And people will tell you about that also, literally and subtextually, if you listen. Other structures that we all know are, one of them is leadership and followership. Everyone wants to be a hero, a leader, and everyone wants to follow. It's the nature of the beast. Okay? We like predictability. We like structure. And what a leader does is provide a notion of, I know the way. That's the definition of a leader. He makes you feel, or she makes you feel, or it makes you feel. An idea could be a leader, a leading idea. It makes you feel you're in something and you know the way. And this relates also to self-story. One thing I always listen for in listening to people is how they exist simultaneously at the most mundane level and at the most mythic level at the same time. Okay, I woke up a trivial example. I woke up this morning and literally the thought I had early upon waking up in my head was, oh, I have to give my travel expense sheet to Michelle. Okay, that's mundane. And I have to make this presentation to you, and I have to be good. I don't want to look like a jerk. I have to talk about people and everything I care about people and the whole pursuit of understanding people, and change the industry's lexicon by one word. That's mythic to me. So I'm mundane and mythic at the same time. And you have to listen for that, because that's another thing that people live in. And one other way of looking, I think, at people, not consumers, is I ask myself, and I think it's profitable to ask these questions when we're doing our work. One is about human nature. Given my client's product or product category or product line or whatever, what are the age-old and ageless images, thoughts, motives that people have in association to that? That's one piece of information. Then another is just what's current. How do they characterize you? And that's real interesting. How people characterize things is just a fascinating topic in itself. And lastly, and I think most importantly, is we have to do our job wonderfully. We have to know something about what I like to call the cultural moment. What's the context of the world that we live in today? And that you get from listening to all people you talk to over all projects. Has nothing to do with one project. But you hear it, once you have a notion of it, you hear it everywhere. It's pervasive. And the story of the cultural moment I hear now, and I've heard it now for about 8 years, which is a very short time. This cultural moment changes very slowly. It doesn't change day to day. It's epoch stuff. It's not daily stuff. What I hear is the cultural moment today, I call the second millennium is the world of two. T-O-O, not T-W-O. Too fast. The world is too fast, too complex, too competitive. And that's, of course, relative to every person's individual experience. But you hear the same story if you're speaking to people in New Guinea or you're speaking to people on Madison Avenue. They say absolutely the same thing. The world is too fast, too complex, too competitive. And what's interesting about that idea, I think, people, of course, say to me, well, you know, life has always been like that. Well, in some sense, true. I think something different is afoot now. And the difference is, no matter all the changes that preceded, we lived in a world of to be or not to be. We lived in a world of or, choices, simple choices in a sense. Now we live in a world of to be and not to be. We live in a paradox. We live in a self-contradiction. And that's the experience of today. Best exemplified by a woman who didn't say much during a focus group I once had in Minneapolis. And then she hesitantly said something which was amazing, which was, quote, "Things are always advancing, getting better, sometimes for the worse." That's the context. That's the air that people breathe nowadays. So I see I'm running a little long on time. I wanted to speak for about 5 minutes or even 10 minutes about how to talk to people. And there's a number of issues there about how to interrogate lovingly, how to live the experience live. Forget discussion guides. Life doesn't have a discussion guide. But you have to have an intent, and how to build an intent which is useful to your client. How not to talk about products, but to talk about life. And in the tale that people spin, T-A-L-E, not T-A-I-L, you naturally meet up with stories that allow you to address your client's stuff. But perhaps I don't have time for that, so maybe another time. I would like to talk lastly about branding and inspiration. It's a huge issue for me. And I think if you think about branding as not a marketing tool, but as something that predates marketing by 3.5 million years, and that is attachment. How do people attach to things? Okay? So marketing calls it branding. Branding, from my point of view, sadly, is ill-conceived by the marketing industry. Branding, they call, is a process by which a company or product name gets associated with a product value or a product quality. The only thing I could say to that is, I don't think so. So let me tell you a little story of how literally this is true, how a shaman in Irian Jaya, the Indonesian part of New Guinea, taught me a lesson, the most important lesson that anyone ever taught me about branding. This is true story, and a true story about me. I went to New Guinea. It was the first time I was studying humans. Before then, I was studying non-human primates. But I had this opportunity to spend 5.5 years in the field to study 2 groups of so-called primitive cultures. So the first one I went to was in New Guinea, a group called Ipo. And when I went there, I realized, wow, this is amazing. These people are the same as me, but they might as well, be in a different planet. So let me just, before I jump into my work, let me just rummage around and roam around for a few days just to get a lay of the land and try to just feel what I'm feeling, whatever it is that I'm feeling. And I had a plan to do that for a day or two or three. Well, that segued into like a month of just roaming around this group. Because I was amazed at what was going on in my head and my heart about what I was experiencing. Given I didn't speak the language or anything, I was making up stories about what was going on. So one day, the shaman, his name was Savanto, which means the one who came down from the sun, goes to a fellow anthropologist that I was in the group I was with, who had spent 9 years living in this tribe. So he knew the language, he knew the kinship system, and he had personal relationships with some of the tribes people. So the shaman comes to my friend, his name is Wolf, from Germany. And the shaman points to me and says to Wolf, because I'm not doing what everyone else is doing, he points to me and he says, "What is that?" Right? He didn't say, "Who is that?" He said, "What is that?" Because he couldn't categorize me. Okay? So Wolf told him a true story about me. I've known Wolf for many years. He's been in the States. He's lived with my family, et cetera, et cetera. So he says to this shaman, he says, "Well, you have to excuse this guy. He's a little strange because he was born very, very early, way too early, and I was a severely premature baby. And he lived in a little box, an incubator." But he just said to the shaman, he lived in a little box and the temperature was regulated. And no one could touch him, and it was a crazy time. And Wolf is a great storyteller, so he really elaborated this thing. And then the shaman says a very good question, because shamans are smart. And he said, "How did he get out of the box?" So Wolf told him a true story, which was his mother had 4 sisters, and they used to come to visit him where his box was, in the hospital. But he didn't use the word hospital. So his mother's sisters, and his mother's mother, and his mother's mother-in-law, all these women used to come every day to see this little boy in a box. So the doctor, his shaman, told his mother, "Well, if all you women can stay in your house, my mother's house, we'll send the boy home, because all of you have to take shifts, like watching over this kid, because you can't let him cry, because if he cries, he'll blow up his lungs." True story. And Wolf is telling this. So here's the point of the story, the lesson of branding. The shaman says then, he points to me a third time, and he says to me, "You and I are the baby kings." Huh? And he tells us a story. He was born not premature, but with a malformed right hip. And in his culture, if you have any deficit when you're born, it's pretty much infanticide is practiced. You're killed. But his mother and her 2 sisters plucked him out of the tribe and ran over to 2 hills away and saved his life, and brought him back like 4 years later to live. So he made this identification, okay? He made a merger, I call it. This metaphoric merger in the phrase the baby king, in the meaning of the phrase the baby king, where his self-story and his story of me, let's call it the product, merged into one story. Okay? That's brand. That's the only condition brand obtains in. Okay? And when you have that, you have what I like to call a spasm of sentiment. Okay? It has nothing to do with attributes. Totally nothing. Once you have attributes, you have commodity. If someone is making decisions based upon this issue and this issue and this issue, that could be good. It's not bad if they like it. But it's not brand. Brand is only that metaphorical merging between the story people have of you, whatever the you is, and the story they have of themselves. And when they have that, bang. It's a must. It's not a want. It's not an ought. It's a must. It just is. And it's not measurable by things like recall and recognition. In fact, you don't want recall and recognition. You just want, you know, that's me. A great example. I was once doing work for Michael Deaver when Reagan was president, many, many, many years ago. And I spoke to someone right after President Reagan invaded Grenada. So she was saying, quote, "I love the way President Reagan handled that conflict. I forgot which one." Okay, that's what she said. I forgot which one. You know, that's a great example of brand. Ronald Reagan as brand. You know, all the attributes, all the reasoning falls away, and you just have something. Okay, that's you, that you identify with. And the best image I have of that is the yellow brick road. The yellow brick road is a metaphor for branding. It's if a person finds your product to be a venue that allows them to traverse this journey such that it's going to help them become more of themselves, more of their self-story. Not a new self-story, but an elaboration of their self-story, then you have brand. Okay? But you only find that out about the mechanism of it, which I have no time to talk about now, when you listen to people. So when you listen to people, all things are possible. You can participate and have a hand in making great advertising. You can do the right thing. You can do the smart thing. And most importantly, for me, you could have fun. So just do it. People are worth it. Thank you.